Hi everyone, I'm Jamie, and my talk is about how to make artists really happy or really mad. I said that wrong way around, but hey, it delivers. So I'm Jamie Cunha. I'm a senior technical artist here at Atomhawk Advance. I've been at Sumo for 3 years now, worked at Lab 42, and then transitioned over to Atomhawk Advance, where now I basically do tools and R&D. I've been working in Houdini for the last half a year, and a bit of Blender as well. But I've been in the industry for 3 years, and that's mainly been at Sumo. One of my favorite titles that I worked on is Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Working by myself for majority of that task. Majority of that project was been an eye opener, and also like learning a lot and how much I can do, and also made me realize what my progression was. But again, it's been amazing to work on this game, and you should definitely play it. It's amazing. Blood, gore, it's fun. And I'm a skater boy. I've been skating for about 7 years now. It's been a while. I started inline skating, ice skating first, and then I was like, hey, I want to skate, but outside, inline skating. So yeah, so now I basically skate outside most of the time, and during the winter months, I skate indoors and go ice skating. And I really love it. It kind of frees me from being indoors all the time, and I learned quite a bit as well, just detaching myself from work. And sumo is the best place to do that because they leave you to do a lot of stuff outside of work. Because after work's finished, work is finished. But yeah, I've had 3 published titles, and it's just quite fun. And probably about 3 brain cells. So if at any point you think, "Oh, this guy's weird," hey, I make jokes. I'm on theme because I am wearing Spider-Man. But let's get into it. So my talk's basically going to be about procedural art, and it's going to be aimed towards intermediate and beginner. So kind of expert, probably not a talk for you, but also you might learn something, maybe. And also, actually, you learn how to create spider webs. I want to put myself down on that point. But yeah, it's my first talk, so if anything up at one point, it kind of gets a bit. Just realized it's the first time doing it, but I'm enjoying this process. Hopefully, there's going to be more talks. We'll see how it goes. So we'll get into it. Creating the foundations for your procedural art. There's 3 different sections. The first one is creation. The second part's going to be transferable skills, like going from Blender to Houdini and just interchanging those ones. I can always change it to like PCG and Unreal. So a lot of this stuff is transferable, just realizing what stuff's needed. And the third one's going to be introspection. That's going to be something that's kind of a bit like figuring out what's good works for you, and like realizing that all these sections aren't tailored in a way that's meant to be from creation. Transferable skill introspection, they can be read and watched interchangeably, so they can always start with introspection first if you need to. So feel free to watch this video because I'm going to be an open talk. But yeah, that's me. Let's go into it. So this talk, I'll be creating spider webs in Blender, and I'll be talking about the research and references that went behind this, and realizing that the software that you're working on is a massive tool in creating a lot of the stuff that you need. So again, you got to know a lot of these steps, and you got to lay down the foundations to make this work for you. Let's go move on. So we're going to start with referencing and research. Google is your friend. I know it collects a lot of information, and that's what it's used for. Use it wisely. Learn about what you're creating. There's not really like fake news. I mean, there is, but think of it this way. There's information out there that's going to be required, and people have done this before you. You don't want to be the first person usually to create this. And if you are the first person to do this, wow, well done. But realize that just because it hasn't been done before, there's other things within the world that have been done, so you can interchange those into your needs. But again, researching like if it's been done before, and how it looks like and how it should look like is a great part of the steps, and it's the core foundation of to make everything work. So just going into it and figuring out what the foundations are, and you do that by researching. So research as much as you can. Look at random things. Enjoy the process. Like, it doesn't have to be totally to the task. Like, I was when I was going into this, I learned about how they decided drugged spiders. So they gave them like LSD, caffeine, meth, and like the way they were creating webs was so interesting. But I was learning how spiders, even though they weren't 100% there themselves, they were still creating webs. Like, so you could see like their thought process behind it. And the thing about organic stuff is nature's done this for millions of years. So, and they've perfected it. So you got to take that knowledge. Don't waste that knowledge, and just think, oh, I'm just going to create this here because I think in the last 10 minutes that I got given this task, this is the way to do it. Nature has gone through failure so many times to get to this point. So using what you've learned from that, do it. Just learn from nature. And yeah, the next part is find your number. Like for me, number 3 is works perfectly for me. And why I say find your number is basically create three different variations when I first start off with a task, because I can see what works in each segment and then I slowly combine them together. Like each 3 variations that I have pros and cons. They all do. None of them is going to be perfect, but you can interchange different sections together, like different variations, sorry, and then say, okay, this works, and this is why this one works. I'm going to see if I can combine these together and then narrow it down to one. Some people, it's like 4, 5, maybe even 2, but I recommend not 3 or above, because it's such a good number, because you don't have to be stuck with just 2 options. The more the better, but don't have too much. Don't give yourself too much options, like 6 or 7. But again, if that works for you, that works for you. But yeah, let's break it down. I'm going to break down basically what procedural art is. Remember, introspection isn't just the end of the project; it's also what you learn from other projects. So you can bring that across to the start of your new task. You got to realize that each segment has a start and end. Like each part has a clear definition where it starts and ends, and you can't move on to the next part until you figure out the first part, second part, and third part. You got to think of procedural art as like a puzzle box. You're kind of combining these different sections, and once you combine them, you unlock the whole puzzle box. And so you got to think of it that way. Procedural art is a puzzle box. I think that's a clean way of describing what procedural art is, because you can't really move on from the first part if you haven't even defined what the first part is. You're going to unlock the first part to move on to the second part. You can't just skip all the third. So you got to figure out what works for you, and know that each segment of the puzzle has to be figured out before you move into the next. Do not skip parts. It's good to have information on what the next part is, but don't move to the second part until you've figured out the first, because they lay down the foundation of the whole task itself. So I'm going to break down the spider web. So there's 3 different sections. The one is the X, or I call them threads. The second is the O, or the rings. And third is groupage. Again, all these parts are separated into 3 sections because number 3 works for me. And also, that's basically the 3 sections of a spider web. So I'm going to go straight into it. The threads, or the X, you got to figure out where the start and end is. So usually when you see spiders, they start from one side to the other. But again, I'm doing a raycast, so I have to start from the middle. But even though I'm starting from the middle, I'm essentially doing the same thing, just my first start point is in the middle. But once I go to the middle, I then go outwards using raycasts, and then I basically, what spiders do, they once they get to the end, they keep making these X's and like combining it together before they move on to the rings, because again, they need to know, like, they need to attach it to a base. So you can figure out that, and once you get that, you then need to figure out where it's colliding with. For this one, I create a collection of boxes, as you can see on the screen, and they were basically just hitting those boxes. I could add more boxes as I can, because I added a collection in Blender, and I defined that this collection is the hit markers, or the hit projectiles, based not projectiles. So that's the wrong way of saying it. the collisions, basically, with the end collisions. So you also realize that you need to optimize as you go. So these raycasts will go on for like ages until you define it. So optimize from the start. So the way I was doing it, if it's further than about 500 meters, end it. Honestly, I should probably do it like probably 5 meters, because there's no spider web that goes 5 meters. Unless you make some crazy fancy game, I guess. Okay, let's move on to the second part. You gotta realize that the needs and wants are very different, and you gotta figure out that if the needs that you have in this project, and if they each want it, you can keep adding more stuff to this, by the way, and people often do. So you need to clearly define what you need in this project, and not project, sorry. This task is: do you need the spider web to be floating? Do you need it to collide with things? Do you need it to be interactive? Do you need it to attach to multiple or just one singular point? Do you need the spider webs to disconnect at any time? Do you need them to be spaced out or not? Or do you just want it to happen? And so clearly defining that at the start will help you massively, because you can keep adding to Procedural Art. And because it's so iterative, you need to know that the more you define stuff, the easier it gets to move on to the next part. Because if you don't define that, you're constantly going back to the start because the foundations have changed. So you need to make sure you define them, and don't navigate forward until you define those settings, because it will ruin a lot of time and you'll waste time. Procedural art is there to save time and not to waste time. Let's move on to the next part. That's the rings. So the rings are the O's. So the way I started this is basically I made sure that I start from the outside ring. This way, it clearly defined where the end of the rings was. And once I got that ring sorted out, I was like, okay, do I need the rings to basically skip some threads? And the way I was doing it is, once I have the data for the threads, I would connect each segment of the threads as it goes across, and that way gave me that ring effect. Sometimes I would just skip some of them. That way, it would create a whole ring but skip some segments. There was another part where it would completely just skip that section but move on to the next part. But again, for this one, I didn't really want that. I was just skipping them completely and navigating to the end point, which is why you can see this kind of sort of like connection point, kind of like a slices. But again, and then this point I was like, do I need droopage? Do I need the whole web to drip right now? Now, at this point, I did not need drooping whatsoever. But at this point, I was kind of experimenting and figuring out like what the drooping would be like, because it adds to the immersion of like, oh, this is an actual physical thing. It has gravity to it. But again, I didn't progress any further apart from just testing a few things out, because at this point, you don't need drooping at all. Like, because you've not clearly defined everything yet. You're still kind of navigating through the second part. And then, yeah, I moved on to like, do I need to make these rings thicker? Do I need to give some sort of sections to make this rings around the webs a bit thick, so it kind of looks like it's somewhat separated from the main like threads? Do I add like some sort of dews, like dews are like water droplets onto it? But yeah, like figuring this out was kind of crucial at this part. So once I got the outside ring, I can then basically just use the same logic and keep repeating it within the web, and give some sort of variations to that I needed. And then we got to droopage. Droopage is basically kind of gives it that physical element of like, it actually has weight to it, and gravity affects the spider web, because no real spider web is just straight out. It's something like this, but even this has some sort of droopage to it. So you got to like figure out like, I need droopage now, because this is the last part of what you need of the spider web. At this point, I was also now giving control to the users. So the artist, it would now clearly define where and how it would droop, as in how much it would drip up or down, left or right. But within this, I gave them the limitations, because I realized that if you give them too much control, the tendrils or the threads would basically just snap or break. And kind of ruin the immersion of a spider web. And so clearly limiting those features is pretty good too. And at this point, I was like, there's a clear hierarchy to this, because if I start affecting droopage, it kind of has an effect on the end piece. Because if I was to do droop at the start, it would have a knock-on effect on the rings and then the threads, and then it will continue to do that, like have some sort of issues at the start. So I'm so glad I did this at the end, because at the end it just affects the whole thing rather than just one single part of it. And it gave me the way to figure out, like, okay, now is the time I can now start catching bugs, pun intended. But yeah, just figuring out, like, now is the time to fix those bugs is basically what the last part was, just fixing those issues. Fixing issues early on kind of created more issues because the whole thing wasn't complete. And then I couldn't move on because stuff wasn't done. So at the end, I was just basically doing bug fixing of the whole thread, of the whole spider web. Sorry. So now we just watch basically the breakdown of how I created it. And this is a finished product. So as you can see, I'll just let you guys watch and enjoy the process. So all of this is done in Blender. And as you can see, you can duplicate multiple and keep connecting them as you need. But yeah. So now we're going to move on to transferable skills. So Houdini versus Blender, the guidelines and like how to create procedural art. And the last part and crucial part of this all is knowing the nodes. Now, I'm going to break down like what I liked about Blender and what I didn't like about Blender. I think the clear defining feature was it was free and it's always updated. It's actually unreal how much it gets updated, quite a bit, and it's always progressing forwards. And being free, it means there's no barrier to entry. Really, it's just your skills that kind of limit you at this point. So anyone starting out, use geometry nodes. They are so useful and it's free. And use Blender. Blender's it's moving on. It's catching on in the industry. So please continue with it and just try it, use it. And this new nerd's being added all the time. So it's always updating, it's always going forward. And I can see good things happening. I mean, there are some limitations, like there's some nodes that I've used in Houdini. It's like, why is this not in Blender? But again, that's just knowledge that exists in other softwares. And I'm like, oh, I can do this so easily in this other software package. But again, I found ways to replicate that, so it is possible. It just takes a bit longer in Blender to do some of that stuff, and because of that, it kind of feels rigid sometimes. Like I have to duplicate a lot of stuff that should already be in the package. But again, it's just starting off, and Drum Chose out and go further. I think the other last part is it has no Python integration within node editor. Something I really missed coming from Houdini to this is being able to just code stuff. I do love nodes and I think it's visually amazing, and I like kind of like switching between them. But again, as a technical artist, you kind of want that mash between visually and also like using code to break down and complete tasks quicker using nodes, using code. And Python such a good language to do that. And I really missed that moving from Houdini to Blender. When we talk about Houdini, it has a lot of documentation because it specializes in procedural art. You can do simulations, you can do basically a lot. It has loads of different sections like SOP, LOP. No, stop. But again, there's loads of networks that works. So, and it has amazing nodes, starter nodes. You can even create nodes yourself. Like you can clearly use them for other projects as well. So you can always like share nodes, which is so useful. So create nodes yourself is amazing. And it has Python integration. Yeah. Again, I'm gonna point this out again. I really love the Python integration that it has because it's so useful to do. I create so much cool stuff, just like using Python within Houdini. But there are cons. I think it feels like a lot sometimes, and it can be pretty daunting, especially the networks and learning like what each one does. But again, documentation is there, so this is something that I found out as an opinion at the start. It does feel like a lot for me. It was quite of learning a lot of jargon that isn't really naturally taught to you. But again, this takes time, and I think just creating something, just going for it, really helped me just get into Houdini, and making mistakes was so beneficial for me. I think the last and crucial part is also it's expensive as hell. It's a lot to get a license. Uh, I, I I very well know this. So because of that, I at the start would definitely not recommend Houdini until you have the proper facility to provide you to use Houdini, and you can actually use it as it should be intended, and you have the needs for it and the wants. But yeah, I think that's another major one for me, which I've been using Blend for this task itself. Uh, Useful nodes. There's some useful nodes between Blender and Houdini, and here's some I really used. I quite want to go through the Houdini one now. Find the shortest path. This one's such a cool node to have and just to learn about. It kind of just gives you the shortest path from points to other points. You can connect these points together as well into a line, kind of giving that like growth effect, kind of like ivy would like grow around something. So I really love this node. It opened out a lot of doors for me, creating more organic stuff like roots and like how stuff would like navigate through the world. It's really good for like natural looking things that you can use. And then connectivity. Connectivity is like such a helper in how to disconnect different meshes. So like if you have a mesh that's been um, combined together but has different materials on like for example a tree, like the branch, the leaves, and the roots, you can then separate using connectivity and then just work on different parts of sections. You can also use connectivity like to basically separate them out depending on the mesh size of each element in the mesh itself. So again, so cool. And then using switch node is again, I love all these nodes, but switch node, you can switch like different segments of the part, so kind of like a gate. So if it meets certain criteria, you can then just say, okay, this meets it, so now just quickly switch to this part instead of using the default one because I want this when these criteria are met, and then you can just navigate through that and like just switch between basically. um, Again, switch node lets you add multiple. It's not just two. It's just, you can add about 80. I don't know how the limitation on it, but you can add a bunch of them on it. So it's not just one or two. It's just you can add plenty variations to it. Again, switch nodes for variations. It's so useful, and I would highly recommend it. And then using sort. I use sort to create some sort when I was working on trees because I wanted to find out like where the bottom of the tree was, and instead of using the height, you can sort them by indexes, and that way you can also figure out like where roots are, where like the branches are, and you can figure out the length of stuff as well. And so using the sort node, sorry, was so useful. And yeah, and the last one is Python. Okay, I've already said talk about Python so far, but I cannot stress this enough. Having a way to code within a node base is so useful because you can combine so many different elements. Because again, nodes are good and they give you like set criterias, but you can always get stuck in them. And so Python kind of like, okay, kind of switches that up for you and gives you something new to work on. And then Blender. So the one I mainly used was basically spline parameters. Give you like the length of stuff, the length of the object that you're working with. So like the length and the IDs, and then navigate through that how that works for you. And because there was multiple splines, I could always separate them out and figure out like each segment needed. So using this, I was creating basically the rings on the spider web. So just using that and learning what those are was so cool. Uh, but yeah, that's kind of where I want to go. I think the rest are kind of like self-explanatory, like the IDs and positions of indexes and like points. But I would say also using collections in Blender was pretty cool. Like you can separate different sections. So again, like for the collisions, I was using a collection, and I just dumped all the meshes and like boxes. For the demo, it was boxes, but you can add any kind of mesh into the collection, and it would just hit off that collection point and then move on. And yeah, and now we're talking about focus on the artist versus you. So at this point, you're kind of like being introspective or retrospective. So at this point, you got to figure out like you got to keep asking artist questions. The more you ask, the more you learn and know what you need. Just kind of being like a little child, like asking why. You know, when a kid comes to you, why can you cross that road? It's like because you gotta watch out for cars; they might hit you. You know, stuff like that. Just the why lets you figure out the needs and wants, and it's such a crucial part of the whole step. So when I was doing this, I was saying, okay, I want a spider web. Why? Because Gary from Level Design needs it for a simple camera focus. You know, why? Why does he need it? So from that, I learned that this is going to be for a cinematic, and I found out that my client is Gary. So I can now uh, talk to Gary about like the next steps. So I can converse with him and like figure out what he needs and wants from this as well. So I already found out who my client is and what he needs. And then I ask why again. And it goes, okay, because the spider web is going to be broken down using a little stick that goes through it. So now I figured out it's going to be interactive, and I know that it needs to break. So I need to figure out stuff, how to interact with my spider web, and ask why again. You can keep going again, why, until you clearly define what you need, so you can start your project. And yeah, knowing who you're working with is such an important part, because they give you clear definitions of what you need. Just talking to Gary and saying, okay, is this good enough for you? Just asking what they need. You're kind of like a tool for them, and you're helping them create stuff quicker. You're not taking their jobs, you're just making it easier for them to create the cool stuff they work on. Giving them the freedom to switch out stuff, give them that. You're kind of let them direct how a spider web is made, because again, you are a tool for them to create content quicker. And just think of it that way. You're making them, you're letting them create stuff, cool stuff, quickly, but you're part of that process. So you have to talk to the client you're working with and figuring that stuff out. It's very much like a mutual connection. So you need to really define what you need and want from that, and just talking to the person and asking them why, and clearly define that stop if we can progress is beneficial. And last but not least is have fun. You're going to make mistakes the whole time, and it's such a crucial part of learning. So making a mistake early on is going to help you so much better. It lets you make mistakes. Realizing that nodes can be just switch around to make them completely better, like completely switches up the whole element and how everything works. Just like there was one point where I was working on the spiderwebs and I was doing the hits before the collection hits. And I was like, hold on, why am I just projecting these rays before I figure out why they need to be, where they need to be, where they need to be hit to the collisions like the boxes. I was like, again, you will make these mistakes, like silly mistakes sometimes. But knowing that knowing the steps that you took to fix that is something that you'd add to your knowledge bank. So it's crucial for you to just say, okay, I want to make mistakes, but I want to have fun doing it. Because at the end of the day, we work in games. We don't work for a corporate oligarchy or like some sort of corporate like numbers. We were doing it for fun. We're giving the stuff we're creating is for people to enjoy themselves. So you should also enjoy that, you know. So just have fun with what you're creating. Enjoy yourself. It's such a learning. It lets you learn so much cool stuff, and also that lets you break down like, how do I create a bench? So you're kind of like in that element of like, that's how they used to create the bench, or like that's how spider webs are made. But yeah, just figure that out. It's your process, and just have fun with it. So short summary, I'll just end it with break down the whole stuff. Such a crucial part. And now there's different segments that you need to complete before moving on to the next. And ask questions. Ask your clients. Ask yourself. Ask those questions. Go to Google. Keep asking questions. Don't stop asking questions, because you're always learning. As soon as you stop asking questions, you kind of stop learning, because you think you know it all. So keep asking those questions, and know that there's no really dumb questions. The next time you just ask questions that are a bit better. So don't be sad about, and don't be just disappointed that it wasn't the right question, even if it was. But again, there's no stupid questions. Just enjoy yourself and know the nodes. Like, it's once you know a node, you kind of figure out why that works for you and why it can be moved around and where it can be moved around to. So just learning about that is beneficial. And don't be afraid to experiment with the nodes. Just because you use this node with another node doesn't mean that it's core fundamental. Like, that's all it can be used for. Experiment different nodes. Nodes get added all the time. And just trying stuff out. So a lot of the stuff I was working with spiderwebs, a lot of that can be used to create basic flowers. They, like the way I was doing the tendrils, that can be then curved around just in itself to create flowers. And I did that by mistake. And now I know if I was to create flowers, I would use the knowledge I learned creating spiderwebs. Again, mistakes are so cool, because it also let you create other stuff just by mistake. So enjoy that process. So I'm going to end it with this one simple question. When's the last time you asked a question and truly listened? Like, and I mean truly listen, because you can ask questions, but have you actually listened and just broke it down in your head why you're asking those questions and what that question is, and then listening to what that answer was? I'm going to leave it at that. So I'm Jamie. I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions, I'll be in. You can contact me anytime. Use my website. Find me on LinkedIn. But yeah, I'm here. I'm a lot more visual, so ask me questions is going to be slightly slow. I'd rather show you. I'm very more visual. Again, that's why I probably like the visual node editor. And yeah, Atomhawk.
Oh, we did just get a question in. If you want it, are you still there?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I was creating this procedural footsteps. I can't talk too much about it because it's project based, but doing fluid sims within Houdini, but then transition that stuff over into Niagara was pretty useful. Just learning a bunch of how you do stuff within Houdini, because it was so much quicker to do the fluid sims. So using that node base within Houdini, I could easily transition that over to Niagara. And you could also take a lot of the information within Houdini and then export out into Niagara. And apart from that, I've made like the basic, like making splines and buildings within Houdini. I was also working on this small little town building that actually Karina is in the chat, but she was working on like models and stuff for it, and I basically created like a few buildings using her assets, which was quite nice when I was working for Lab 42. So I use Blender for that though. But yeah, that's how I got into like geometry nodes and stuff.